Well, let's discuss the Prime Minister's meetings on Parliament Hill today with three journalists from the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Stephanie Levitz is a national politics and policy reporter with the Canadian Press. Joël-Denis Bellavance is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for La Presse. And John Ivison is a columnist with the National Post and Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Post Media. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Stephanie, let me start with you. What did you hear of significance in the post-meeting comments from Andrew Scheer today that give us any indication of how this relationship, especially between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives, might work in this minority parliament?
The one thing that struck me was Andrew Scheer using the words common ground, because he actually referenced that. And he's called a lot on Trudeau to, find a way to unite the country, reflect on the results of the election. And Scheer himself has never given any indication that he's looking for any common ground. Today, he gave some concrete examples where he does think his party has it with the Liberal Party. And I found that telling because it did evidence a little bit of willingness on the part of Andrew Scheer to do what a lot of people are asking him to do, which is to lead, just to be a leader for the party, be a leader for the folks in Alberta and Saskatchewan who, don't have any representation in government. So when he talked today about finding common ground with the Liberals, some things they'd like to see in the throne speech that he feels the Liberals are going to meet them halfway on, that was an interesting change of tone from Mr. Scheer today.
What did you hear, JD?
The plea for national unity, coming from a guy from Western Canada, this is a novelty for me because usually you hear those pleas from Quebec, because Quebec has been the epicenter of the national unity debate, but that has now been displaced to Western Canada. And I guess if Mr. Scheer is raising that option with the Prime Minister, is that he's taking this very seriously, coming from Alberta and Saskatchewan. And we heard the Premier of Alberta last weekend that he wants more autonomy within Canada, and he's following the footstep of Quebec in that regard. And Mr. Trudeau also met today Scott Moe, the Premier from Saskatchewan.
We'll get into that in a minute as well.
And he's also pleading for more autonomy. So you see growing movement, I think, in westward for more autonomy for the provinces.
What do you think we're going to see in this relationship, John? How important is Andrew Scheer to the survival of Justin Trudeau's government?
Well, I think Mr. Trudeau can't ignore the fact that he is no longer in a majority government, and he's going to need help from all sides of the House. I think that I gather they discussed things today which were there may be common ground on. We're thinking about not only the middle class tax cut, the NAFTA agreement. TMX is a big one. I mean, there may not be anything that's required in the House to get the Trans Mountain pipeline shifted, but apparently Mr. Scheer raised the question saying nobody believes you when you say you're going to do this. And apparently Trudeau replied, well, you can help with that.
Stop beating us up over it.
How about you don't beat us up saying that we're not going to get it done? So I think there are areas where there's a little bit more of a perhaps humble attitude, which is not the word that springs to mind when you think of Justin Trudeau, but I do think that they're cognizant of the fact that they did not win a majority government, and they're going to have to, clearly the Bloc and the NDP are going to be more likely partners, but there are areas where the Conservatives could help them. I mean, there were other things in the platform, for example, home tax renovation, that they could come to some accord on.
And I guess, Stephanie, how much of Andrew Scheer's own challenges within the party factor into that, the role he can play, how hard he can be on Justin Trudeau, or how much cooperation he has to show? He's sort of also trying to hang on to his own job, right?
Right, and it's both of those things. I mean, we know that the Trudeau is a dirty word in the West now, and the folks that backed Scheer not only in the October election, but that backed him for leadership, they want him hard against Justin Trudeau. But there's a faction within the party as well who say, one of the main criticisms of Andrew Scheer going into the election was he didn't seem prime ministerial. He didn't give off any gravitas. He didn't seem like a leader. He needed to work on that. And perhaps, what I'm hearing is this is one of the ways that Andrew Scheer can work on that. Can he put forward sort of a more statesman-like approach? With NAFTA, as John references, this need to sort of get on side with NAFTA, he was very dismissive in a way of the way Trudeau handled that, much to the chagrin of many in his own party who said, no, we were supposed to be playing a national unity card, for lack of a better thing.
Well, a whole lot of former Conservative cabinet ministers were.
Exactly. And
James
he
Moore
wasn't.
and Rona Ambrose.
He wasn't. And so is this a chance for Mr. Scheer to sort of shore up some of those credentials within the party to say, look, I can be the Prime Minister, and here's a way, to borrow a Trudeau phrase, just watch me. Here's maybe what it might look like if I were.
Mr. Scheer was hoping for an earlier recall of Parliament. He was pleading for November 25th, and it's going to be later. Well, for one reason, Mr. Scheer wants to have some time in the House of Commons to show that he still has a good command of his party in the House of Commons and a good command of the issues. Now, it's going to be a short session until probably from December 5th to 13th, and we're not going to be back until January, the end of January. So that leaves little time for Mr. Scheer to prove that he's still, the right leader for the Conservative Party, whereas he's fighting for his own survival within his party because there is a leadership vote coming up in April in Toronto.
Did you are you detecting a change in Scheer's approach, John? I mean, there's the whole notion that if you want to appear to be the government in waiting, look like the government in waiting. You know, like,
I haven't seen much of a change, to be honest.
Right. He's still. How so? I mean, what did you see in?
Well, I think more telling was what came out of the meeting last week with the caucus, where the caucus decided not to use its power to vote him out at the time. Although I think many of them felt like they wanted to, but that it should be left to the membership, not the caucus. And what Scheer said when he came out did not send the signals, at least to me, that he acknowledges that any mistakes were made in the campaign. I don't think the word mistakes came out of his mouth. So I think he has to change his tone a little bit, and maybe this is the start of it. Maybe today we saw a little bit of a more authoritative, less confrontational tone.
We talked about a little bit about Western alienation, and I think Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer talked about that as well, which brings us to Scott Moe. He's not very happy. He came here thinking, I have some proposals to try and deal with concerns of Saskatchewan in particular and the West in general, and it sounds like he was totally shut down. And if Justin Trudeau has a plan for trying to deal with the concerns of the West, what is it if it involves shutting out completely the Saskatchewan Premier?
And that's exactly Scott Moe's, what he walked out the door with calling for today, right? He was visibly angry, visibly upset, saying, okay, Mr. Trudeau, you said on election night you're listening to our concerns, you're listening to our frustrations. And according to Mr. Moe, he heard nothing today being put on the table to deal with that. I mean, one could wonder, what signs will we see when Mr. Trudeau appoints his cabinet on November the 20th? Are there going to be some signals sent there to ways that he's, I don't know, putting an ear to the ground in Western Canada to listen and reflect? The things that Mr. Moe had put on the table, I mean, he's had them on the table for quite some time. If they were, I don't know that they could ever have been considered realistic proposals off the top. A one-year pause on the carbon tax, that wasn't necessarily going to happen. I mean, more action on pipelines, there's room there. I don't know why Mr. Trudeau can't signal, yeah, hey, we're looking at expanding the markets or the things that Mr. Moe is asking for. And then, the question on equalization, that's a thorny issue.
But I think that's the one where he could have signalled. I mean, apparently he's been briefed on this. The existing system there was a 5-year extension put on it in 2018, so that's due to expire in 2023. But what's to stop the Prime Minister saying, we're going to appoint a panel to revamp this thing so that when that 5-year period comes to an end, we have a more generous system. Now, to Saskatchewan, the problem with that is it's a zero-sum game, and if you give a more generous regime to Saskatchewan, it's probably going to be less generous to Manitoba and Quebec.
Well, then it lights a southern fire we're seeing in the province of Quebec today, right? I think the province of Quebec was putting a motion before the legislature. They're saying no changes to equalization without Quebec's approval.
There are legitimate complaints about the fact that the market price for hydro, for example, is not included in the equation of provincial income, either in Manitoba or in Quebec. I mean, that is just a gerrymandering of the system, which could be corrected to the benefit of Saskatchewan and Alberta.
Well, in Quebec would argue that the government has been subsidizing fossil fuels for so many years and has not subsidized hydroelectricity. There's a big debate about that, about the current formula. One criticism I think that is fair is that the equalization formula does not reflect the economy of today. There's always 2-3 years lagging behind.
Right.
And so it penalizes provinces.
It's not at all nimble.
Exactly.
It's set. It can't adjust to market conditions.
Exactly. And for Alberta and Saskatchewan, they are in dire situation right now financially. And that's one of the biggest complaints. We are suffering, whereas we're saying they pretend to send big amount of money to Quebec and other provinces, and while Quebec is sitting a 4.5 billion surplus. So Quebec, I understand why the Parti québécois passed that motion in the National Assembly, because they're attached to that.
But it is more complicated than that.
But your point being there was a possible opening, an overture there where it said, look, we understand to this whole idea that I've listening, I've heard your concerns, And
now maybe he's going to do that with Kenny when Kenny comes to town or whenever they speak. That's the offer he makes it to.
From the throne. That
right.
could be,
or maybe he waits till the big sit down with the premiers, right? And he gets them all in a room and says, "Okay, let's show some kind of united front on this."
But it would still seem to me like a missed opportunity today. If that's the plan, to not have said, "Look, Scott, we're working on it. You know, just hold your breath for a little bit. We're gonna get there." Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Good to be here.